Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
It's that feeling of perpetual grief that comes at us all in very different ways, and if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you are in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and we pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and conversational fashion. And if you like how we do things around here, I'm going to assume that you do because you're listening right now. You can subscribe to the podcast. You can give us that big old like and subscribe and 5-star rating, basically wherever you get your podcast. We're over at Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google. We're pretty much everywhere. And plus we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel. So you can give us a like and subscribe there as well. We'd really appreciate it. Also, don't hesitate to reach out and follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and I'm a broken record, but I say this all the time, it's the most important thing. Please come pay us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, basically the moving image at large, because if we love to watch it and write about it and talk about it, we love it when you come by and read about it and listen about it. So please pay us a visit. On this episode, we got a real interesting one, a little bit of CanCon, which we finally got to catch up with, which All My Puny Sorrows, and it's based on Miriam Toews' best-selling novel of the same name, which is the story of, it's a heart-wrenching story, really, of two sisters. Yoli, played by Alison Pill, has a writing career that's basically going down the toilet. She's getting a divorce and making some, let's just say, questionable relationship choices. Even her mother and Yoli's daughter see sort of the unhappiness in her. By contrast, Yoli's sister, Elf, is a world-renowned pianist, and she's adored by audiences and by her husband. But Elf is obsessed with ending her life, just as their father did 10 years ago. As both sisters are haunted by their father's choice and their oppressive Mennonite upbringing, the sisters stake their positions, often conversing in quotations. And it's one of those things where we see the duel back and forth, where one wants to live and one wants to die, and neither is quite sure why. And it really is a fascinating look at just sort of the nature of mental health and depression, and just really dives into so much. And it's got some fantastic performances from Alison Pill and Sarah Gadon, who plays the other sister, and the mother's played by Mare Winningham, and the father played by Donnell Logue. It's a really, really wonderful film. It had its debut at TIFF last year, and like I said, it is in theaters in Toronto, Vancouver, Winnipeg now, with other cities to follow in the weeks and months to come. With that being said, we did have a unique and absolutely fantastic opportunity to sit down with Michael McGowan to talk about sort of the origins of the film, why he wanted to adapt the book, and why he wanted to tell this story. And I think we had a really interesting talk. But check out the film, All My Puny Sorrows, and check your local listings. But first, check out our conversation with Michael, because between you and me, it's a pretty good one.
All right. Well, obviously, Michael, just first off, thanks for the time today, man. I appreciate this.
Oh, no problem. My pleasure.
Now, I mean, congratulations on the movie. I mean, I loved it. I guess my first question for you is just walk me through, I guess, why you want to adapt the book and tell the story sort of on the big screen.
Well, I mean, I hadn't seen mental illness and suicide portrayed in a way that Miriam had in the book, and that I found interesting. And then I thought there was 3 great roles that could be castable. So when you're trying to do sort of an independent film, you're always looking for ways that it can sort of elevate it. And I thought that the roles would be one of those ways.
No, no, and I mean, you're absolutely right. There's some great performances in this film, and I mean, I think the thing that really stood out for me was not just the depiction of mental illness, but just the unquantifiable nature of grief, which, pop culture does tend to try to push against and sort of put it in a box, but really it's such a dynamic and strange thing to sort of go through. And I mean, I think in particular, I loved Allison's performance, and I mean Mare's performance. Can you talk a little bit about finding the right people for the right parts? Because I mean, obviously, you're putting people through the meat grinder on this one, and people really have to sort of be in tune with material.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that Miriam had given such a great roadmap, even like, the people that read the script then could also use the book as a reference. But casting is always an alchemy and luck and all these weird things. I mean, who's available when they're available? Do they want to do it? And so, I mean, Allison, we were incredibly fortunate to get Allison, and then that was the driver, because we could have really gone 10 years older with that role if we had to. But so then Allison, and then Sarah was a natural fit with Allison, and it was great that they're both Canadian from a Canadian novel. And then our casting director, Heidi Levitt, was like, she was throwing out names and brought Mare forth. And again, I mean, I just think the three of them, that sort of triangle works so well together. And they, like Allison and Sarah had worked together before, and Mare and Allison had worked together before, so they knew and liked each other, which I also think helped with the shorthand, because like we only had 20 days to shoot.
Was there a lot of rehearsal time or going over the script? Because I mean, in particular, the scene in the middle, just between Allison and Sarah, when Allison sort of finally has her breakdown, that felt like it was such a note perfect moment. Like, was there a lot of work to sort of get sort of the beats right of the film?
Yeah, there was actually, and I haven't really done rehearsals before, but Allison really wanted to, and it made a huge difference because Allison and Sarah really workshopped all those scenes in the hospital to really track the progression. And so we had we had time in prep to go through them, and on the weekends and stuff like that, to really go through those scenes and make sure that they were all that they could be, so that by the time we came on set, we weren't having those discussions. It was just really executing. And both Allison and Sarah, they had told me, because they were child actors, there was always a huge pressure that they felt to learn their lines. So they're incredibly meticulous in their preparation, not only sort of looking at the material and challenging the material, but also being ready to perform. There's nothing worse, especially when you don't have a lot of time, if an actor is still trying to find their way through actually getting off book and knowing it, which they were the opposite of.
For this, because I mean, obviously, again, independent shoot, small budget, but I'm kind of curious, like when you're lighting, like crafting, like sort of how you want the film to look. Is it a question of sort of set design or location scouting, or is it just just trying to find the right sort of texture of lighting, particularly in the hospital rooms where you're just going to be spending so much of the film?
Yeah, it's a combination of a lot of things. I mean, I don't like, sort of as the writer, I'm thinking about how I'm gonna pull it off as a director. But then when I'm the director, you're always trying to make the best decisions. So we were going to shoot somewhere for 6 days because of COVID. We lost it, like the hospital. We lost that location, and then you're like, okay, how do I reimagine this? And especially when Elf goes to the psych ward, there's a train yard behind it, which really, I think, sort of has a resonance through the whole film for various reasons. And then we were definitely, with the cinematographer, thinking of, when are we at these scenes, during the night, during the day? How do we want them to look as we progress through the film? What's she wearing? All these little decisions that hopefully the viewer doesn't see, but they do play a part in how we're filming and what we're filming and how we're executing that.
In a story like this, it's obviously important to also have a little bit of levity at the same time. And I mean, I loved Allison's sort of deadpan narration throughout, and I loved the parking lot scene as well in particular. Like, how important was it for you to sort of make sure that we at least had a little bit of balance with some, I mean, I don't want to say light, but at least a bit of sardonic wit sort of sprinkled throughout?
Yeah, I do think there's a light. I mean, it's a heavy subject matter, and the humor that was in the novel and the levity that I try to put in the script were really important, because it's a hard film for sure, but it's not, there's sadness, there's humor, there's comedy, there's all these different things. Hopefully it feels like the same germane world, but it was really important. I just did not want it to be like, oh my God, a survival test of grief and depression through the whole thing. That I don't think I would have taken it on if there wasn't
No,
that
I mean,
key.
I'll admit I'm not familiar with the book, but obviously adapting something for the big screen is never going to be easy. But it really felt like here you managed to keep some of the harder edges in that maybe other adaptations or other people who would have adapted a similar story like this would have sort of rounded them out a little bit. And like, I'm kind of curious how true is your version of this to maybe sort of the book?
Well, I mean, it's funny because I can't really remember what I did and what was from the book, but I think that the truth in the adaptation is probably Miriam and her family's reaction to it. I mean, because it did come out of Miriam's lived experience.
Right.
And they were at Toronto for the opening, her mom, Miriam, and her daughter, and they could not have been more effusive uh, in their praise for the film, and I think we got it right in their eyes. And so, but you're not. Some people have seen it that have read the book and sort of A-B'd it, and like is like basically just adapted the book, which is a really high compliment, but that wasn't the case either. So, I mean, there's scenes where in the book where one character was saying something, but it was important, and in the real estate of the film, I put it onto another character because I needed to achieve the same thing. So there's all kinds of things that you do in the adaptation to make it work for film.
And I mean, I have to draw a bit of a through line from this to 1 week because I mean, obviously both are dealing with hard topics, but there's an honesty to it. And I'm kind of curious, what is it about that sort of level of honesty that draws you into stories like this?
Well, thanks for that. I think what you said earlier about rounding off the edges, it, there's not, I wouldn't even know if it's grittiness or not, but there's a truth I'm trying to get to that's not necessary. It doesn't feel tied up or palatable, or not necessarily unpalatable either, but I'm trying to put real people in interesting situations that the audience then can hopefully use as a jumping off point for their own lives. And if you can't relate to the characters because they're all rounded and perfect, I think it takes the viewer out of the film rather than into it more.
No,
Especially
and I mean you're absolutely right. I mean, there's not necessarily a happy ending or a terrible ending. There's just an ending, and I mean, in reality, that's life. You know that those stories end, stories begin, and there is something about that that makes it so much more engaging on a humanistic level. And I mean, I've got to ask, and this is a bit of a silly question, but it's one I always like to ask. I'm kind of curious, like everyone who gets into this business always tends to be a bit of a fan first. And I've always been kind of curious, like, what were the movies, or maybe the sort of the moments that sort of attracted you into the business of storytelling?
So I came at it sort of as a failed novelist, and I couldn't get a novel published. And then I got into journalism and did a bunch of that and was working as a carpenter. And then I written a screenplay just sort of as, I don't know, just as an exercise, not really ever thinking I would direct it or anything like that. And then I saw Clerks at TIFF and I thought, you know what, I mean, I love the film and still do, but it was like, it just seemed accessible to me in a way that I hadn't seen a film as accessible before. And then we decided to try to, like, we decided to try to make a film. And so I would say if you asked me in my 20s if I would have been a director, it wasn't even on my radar. But I was always a writer and a storyteller, and I sort of fell into the directing almost by accident, really.
From your perspective, why do you think pop culture tends to put issues like mental health and grief sort of in a box, as it were, like trying to sort of, like I said before, round those edges and make it something a bit more quantifiable? Because I mean, at least for me, as someone who has, lost loved ones and experienced grief and loss, it resonated with me more because it made sense rather than trying to sort of, put a bow on it, as it were.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I can't really speak to the larger cultural forces, but I mean, I sort of go back to the source. Like Miriam wrote such a beautifully honest book that came out of her lived experiences. And there wasn't an easy answer at the end of it. It wasn't like, okay, here, like it was messy. And I think that's one of the attractions to trying to adapt it, and also then not take the book and then just put it in a box with a bow and say,
Right.
okay, here it is. It's like, if you love that about the book, then try to do that in the film.
Well, you know what, man, I think you've done that and then some, but just thank you for making something messy, but also truly humanistic at the same time, which I think is kind of the point of storytelling. And I think you've made a beautiful piece of work. And I just, thank you for thanks for the work and thanks for the time today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks so much.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.